10 seconds. Unchanged as expected. Fed does not see inflation rising above 2% before 2023 there, so again, that's quite dovish.
And get into the mind of the warrior, and perhaps one of the best discretionary futures day trader, at least in the European continent that I know of. My circles go back for 20 years now, who again has had this huge influence of traders beyond the London trading floor.
Down in the bones, bulldog-like ability to just have ultra conviction in himself. He can just see it, believe it, and he will attack like ultra violence. And it is a spectacle. It is a spectacle to watch him.
When the industry was collapsing, he showed a way that no one else thought was possible. And he actually pulled people behind him up in performance.
I've seen this, people sitting next to him, hot desking, and they come back a bit more furious. They come back a bit more racket smashing. They have a bit more energy in them.
His ability to harness the emotions that most of us fear to look at consistently.
He was onside $1 million, very close to it, and he came all the way back. He was upset. But in that moment, at that place in his career, that was the right decision. Why?
These two chapters are literally a book on their own. And it's that book for those to unravel a legend of our industry. Bogdan, today is an incredibly exciting day because we're speaking here in Cyprus about the warrior, his homeland, his birthplace, where many of the Greek gods have apparently descended or ascended. And this is a trader that so many people in our industry know about, but yet so many people don't know. And this is a trader where since 2016, we've shown his journey, his growth from making $20,000, $40,000 days to $1 million plus days. He has single-handedly put life back into the industry. Back in 2016, and we mentioned many times before, when the industry was collapsing, he showed a way that no one else thought was possible. And he actually pulled people behind him up in performance. He pushed those traders with more experience in higher performance, just showing what was possible. And he's a trader that also has never backtested ever in his life. He looks into the future. He is that primordial intelligence of that adaptive trader who cultivates his own future. And he's someone that I know everyone wants to find out a little bit more about his backstory. Well, we've got two parts in Traders of Our Time that explains his entire journey as a trader, his way he views the market, the way he looks at the market. This is for those traders who don't think trading news is possible. This is a trader who's made news his bread and butter, but he started as an order flow trader. And I think I'd love to hear your perspective on what this trader, the warrior, means to you.
Alex, I mean, the warrior, I am gushing for words, but let me put it this way. I was his number one fanboy since day one. I've been president of many fan clubs, but our warrior was definitely the first one. Let me put it this way, Alex. He is the absolute standard, the standard bearer of absolute performance and what it takes and what it costs. Because not only do we have several stories of $1 million payday plus, we also have stories there of him giving back that much. And actually, his chapter starts with that kind of day. It was in March 2020. He was up 1 million or very close to it, and then ended up giving it back for reasons that will be apparent in the story. He is so absolutely determined to perform. He has various alerts, alarms, squawk services, everything you could imagine in every single place, just in case something comes over the news wires when it's like prime time, like just now, like when Trump is talking all the time, conferences here and there. And in every aspect, Alex, reimagining what it takes to be a news trading performer, but even as a trader generally, what it takes. I'm just super excited. There's just so much we had to give him. He gets 2 chapters in the book, and even that was very, very tough to know from a writing perspective what to keep and what to cut and so on. So as Alex said, for everyone that knows him, you've seen him through many times on the YouTube channel, putting his actual trades. You'll find out everything about this trader. And for those who don't know him, I'm sure you'll become the ultra fan very, very quickly.
He defies so many absolute textbooks of what it means to be a trader. And he also creates, through that defining or creates a pioneering approach of stepping into new frontiers as a futures day trader and believing in it in conviction. But one of the most fundamental elements of his performance that has just grown exponentially, for the last 10 to 15 years is his ability, and I know we speak about it in the chapter with regards to AI versus human, but his ability to scale conviction. And we were speaking about it yesterday when we were walking around the Cyprus office. You and I went for a walk, thinking about how are we going to, in a 1-hour podcast, try and bring together as much as possible for those out there who are futures day traders, who are learning on the DOM, who are developing their skill sets, also might have an allergic reaction to not wanting to trade news, but also understanding that his foundational element for him to be successful as a news trader was his order flow skill set.
Yes.
And so this trader, who is the opposite of the algorithm, who is the opposite of being super backtesting orientated, and really lives himself in the so-called world building world. Can you describe a little bit what world building means to you? We express it in the book. So if you can just go in a little bit more depth of one of these core attributes that he has as this elite 8-figure trader, who again has had this huge influence of traders beyond the London trading floor. There are traders across the pond who have mimicked and who have learned lessons from him on the YouTube channel, watching his 7-figure trades, and have gone on to be actually 8-figure traders themselves. So what is world building to you?
World building is all about making what is very implicit, explicit. Implicit to how the warrior conceptualizes all his trading and how he thinks about markets, and a lot of other traders too. But the warrior is truly the embodiment of it and the most clear-cut model of world building. So world building, Alex, is essentially the very human ability, and I stress human versus AI or so-called AI, or before the AI term, algorithmic trading. It is the very human ability to forecast into the future, to create various possible shadow futures. Shadow meaning you have a range of options of what that world can look like. And that for your ability to be utilize your depth of understanding macroeconomics, market fundamentals, market knowledge, the world that, you start from, it's like a superstructure. You understand everything from the big economic cycles all the way down to market structure positioning and then flow. And because you can imagine all these different futures, all these different perhaps geopolitical scenarios, and central bank implications, so on, you can then understand, layering these kind of concepts up, how the markets will react in that kind of world at any given time. So it's your ability to imagine different world states, these branches, if you will, for you to then very quickly shift gears because you've done all the thinking beforehand. If one reality becomes the case, and to then understand the kind of correlations and flow and market digestion that is going on. And that is the key skill of the warrior, because he is the supreme savant-like, and that is no exaggeration, a savant-like operator within market correlations and flow. And market correlations and flow is essentially the downstream effect of what is happening upstream. So any given day, you might have risk on, risk off, a bear flattening move, a bull flattening move, whatever. There's a lot of shorthand for describing these. But context is everything in that. And context is the container of the world, i.e. world building, and understanding how fast we can shift from one thing to another overnight. For example, the Russian invasion of Ukraine. For example, the assassination of Iranian General Soleimani. That was a case where the markets reacted where overnight we can have a very different geopolitical world. And then we didn't. And then we shifted into what came before. So it's taken that very edge-like ability for the warrior to world build, conceptualize future paths. And the most important, Alex, I stress, this is what separates the intellectual from the practitioner, the warrior from other traders, is his utter, I cannot stress this, utter, down in the bones, bulldog-like ability to just have ultra conviction in himself. He doesn't need other people to tell him, the other details. He can just see it, believe it, and he will attack like ultra violence. And it is a spectacle. It is a spectacle to watch him. It's a spectacle to watch him trade, see a recording of him trade. But that's just like reading Shakespeare in a book versus seeing it in the theater. Seeing it in the Warriors theater, which is his desk, is a whole other experience, and a frightening one indeed, because Alex, he is the expectations breaker. If you take any retail trader, anyone who's new, or anyone who has preconceptions about how a trader should or shouldn't trade, meaning, be some kind of librarian and a Zen master of emotions, you see the Warrior trade, and you think that guy's having an existential meltdown every single day of the week. But he could be up a huge amount, down a huge amount. He could be going for like a 3-tick extension of something, and he just lives and breathes every single tick. And he says he's done that since day one, and he does that in day, how many years we're in now?
Yeah, and Bogdan, I think I'd love to segue as we try and explain to those who don't know the Warrior. There might be many, part of our inner community who understand the Warrior, who've been, within his physical proximity, especially the traders who trade on the floor. And what I'd love to explore is some of his traits, because you might be able to understand the caliber of individual we're dealing with here. And the reason why I want to explain this trader is for you, who's watching it, is understanding the possible and the frontierness of what it takes to get to the level that he's got to. And I wanted to start with something that's happened very recently, and then we can, jump amongst each other amongst some of the trades. And I think that trade you mentioned right at the beginning is also a very interesting trade. I don't know how much we want to reveal, but it reveals a large part of his personality.
Yes.
And so the trade that I want to speak, and I just spoke to him yesterday. Monday, they just gone past, the whole AI world was cracked up on the Deepseek, the introduction of the Chinese AI. And that hit the market over the weekend. He knew nothing about it. He actually had a big Greek weekend again at some event. We've actually in the newsletter that you write, the Asymmetrist, you speak about one of the articles, the Stamina, on a big Greek weekend, big fat Greek weekend.
Mm-hmm.
And this is a trader who knew nothing about Deepseek. He had a few little sources, a couple of traders that messaged him, have you seen this news? He was a little bit, busy being entertained on the weekend. Enjoying his weekend life after being, at the shackles of his desk all week. And what was fascinating when I spoke to him yesterday, and it's all going back to this world building, but also his ability when something he's unsure of, how he feels the order flow and how he starts feeling the surrounding inputs.
Yes.
And he's creating this, these future states. And that's the power of the imagination. And imagination is it can be well trained, and he's well trained. In imagination, world building, they go hand in hand. And so that trade, just to summarize very quick, you made multiple 6 figures yesterday. There was significantly more available to him, as he always believes, and as he believes he underperformed, even though he made multiple 6-figure trades. He came in, and on the main news wires at 11 p.m. UK time, just before the markets were about to open, 11 p.m. UK time on his main news wire, he entered the keyword, and he saw there was hardly anyone on the so-called legacy news wires not saying anything. Deepseek wasn't a thing. Whereas in the so-called X world, it was a thing amongst the AI enthusiasts. But a niche environment. And his ability to understand, well, why has the market been propped up over here? His ability to work out in that moment that I'm going to enter a trade. I've had a few information inputs from a few traders. And entering the trade and holding the trade, because when he entered, it took a while for mainstream news outlets to start coming and saying this is important. And so he's entered the trade, markets have gapped, hasn't really moved yet. Many of our other traders have exited the positions thinking, well, this isn't important, this isn't a theme. And him being over there, creating this future projection and saying, well, we just need the news wires to pick this up. Almost a precognition in a way. I need more and more of these news wires to pick up this information. And I'm going to stay in this trade for a few hours. And as the news wires started picking up, so did the momentum start happening. And so this is this trader whose ability to where all other traders have given up, he can still maintain conviction while others are messaging him on a Sunday night saying it's not moving. So you're getting all these dark whispers and you can still maintain your own individual identity. So just before we go there is, for me, that illustrates a trader who can act individually with conviction and maintain levels of conviction whilst those don't. Most can give up on that.
And that illustrates not only the power of his world building in terms of actually understanding, shall we say, and I'll use this word crudely, on the intellectual side, understanding how things are positioned. And that is also, by the way, a product of immersion. This is not someone who went 2 weeks on holiday, then had his big Greek night out, and then came into the markets. As much as he might go out in these moments in time and party, whatever, he is still a very dogged performer. He is there at his desk practically 24/7, either at home or in the office, and he's watching things constantly. He's immersed. He sees the most recent, everything from the most recent flow. He understands positioning, everything that's been going on, themes that come in and wash through the markets and so on. And then he can just leap directly into something novel. That shows his immersion, his understanding, and, as I just said, the thing that separates him among others, or the intellectual and the practitioner, is his level of conviction and being able to hold it. He is quite literally, we talked about this the other day, if he were in a different environment, he would be the embodiment of someone who is kind of like your frontier technology pioneer, maybe CEO of a company where everyone tells him this is an impossible industry, this is a dead industry, this is not possible. And he would have the conviction to put on his own personal life savings into it, or somehow use the strength of charisma and character to keep investors on board and see through the mission. He is that kind of, he is a category of one in terms of conviction and believing it and figuring it out. And as you said, Alex, which we'll talk about in a bit, that instance was not predicated on having to see this discrepancy between legacy newswires and how the conversation on X or Twitter was very different and, Deepseek. He didn't have to see that 5 times. He didn't have to see that twice. He didn't have to see that once. He saw that 0 times and acted upon that trade with the conviction of someone who's been backtesting 1,000 sample sets. And that right there is the distance between an 8-figure and a 7-figure trader. And that right there is the difference between a high-performing discretionary human trader and those who go into trading on a more inductive sample set algorithmic type of approach.
That sample, and I'll dig deeper into this. That sample set of 0, as you described, you mentioned it yesterday when we were walking around. I said, you only need to see a sample set of 1. You said, Alex, you only need to see a sample set of 0. And that sample set of 0 is the precursor of that narrative intelligence, which we explore in the chapter. So for those who are wanting to develop this understanding, we open it up with references to someone that's been very influential in our space, especially in the training space, Angus Fletcher, and his views and his development of narrative intelligence. But that sample set of 0 truly means that you are this adaptive, and the US Army called it VUCA, the ability to operate with high efficiency in an environment that has volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. And so when you have all your data points being crushed by the outlier, this is where he excels. And where that sample set of 0, his best trades, his high multi-5-figure trades, his big 7-figure day trades, that is, are all a function of something that has never been seen before. When the market comes with a completely new repricing event that cannot be captured in the data. And your perspective on the sample set of 0, why is it? And I can give you my view afterwards as well. What is your interpretation, and along with, effectively using Angus Fletcher's words and how we explored in the book and his chapters in particular, what is different between a human trader and a machine trader and the training of that human trader? What elements are you trying to train in that human trader to be rich in imagination?
It is essentially the ultimate outcome, Alex, to start there and then work backwards to understand why we mention this. It's something we explore actually fully in the engineers chapter, trade sense. We use that. And we will not go too deep into trade sense, but it's essentially navigating what, as you said, the US Army calls VUCA, volatility, uncertainty, complexity, ambiguity, especially this word complexity we also talk about in the book for very, very good reasons. And I'll say this now. The markets are complex like a rainforest, not complicated like a car. And that is extremely important because so many people, myself included, and pretty much 99% of all people who come in with their preconceptions of markets and want to do something, come into thinking that markets are an engineering problem to solve. Meaning that there is one answer, and the more computational power you throw at it, you will solve it. Brute force, which is coincidentally a lot of how a lot of LLMs work. And the current so-called, again, AI. AI meaning drawn from a lot of sample sets, i.e. inductive reasoning. And again, you mentioned Angus Fletcher, and he talks about, the understanding very lucidly how a lot of everything based from GPT to any other developments in this reinforcement learning, you need, it's in the name, reinforcement. You need these sample sets. You need to keep seeing it to train that model. And that model, if the environment is static, like a car, it may be complicated, but it's static and never changes. You can iterate your way to perfection. And this also leans onto someone who we bring up in the book, Eric Larson, who talks about these kind of models are also fragile because should you change any parameters, that trained model underperforms very quickly. And so again, coming back to this, it's understanding that markets are an infinite, ever-evolving landscape. It's also suggested in the subtitle of the book, Navigating the Market's Impossible Landscape. So we mean it's a bit of a play on words. In this case, we mean it about how using common sense, using statistical analysis, using sample sets that might make sense in the real world, does not work in the financial market world because it's this very strange, complex environment where 1 + 1 = 3 a lot of the time. Up means down, down means up. And all of a sudden, when you just start learning that up means down and down means up, sometimes up can actually mean up. And sometimes 1 + 1 actually equals 2. And that is what separates, again, the human operator versus the statistical model. So Alex, I've spoken about many, many, many things there, but to tie it together, it is just this. The reason we talk about all of this in the book, if we understand the computer advantage and we understand what they do, meaning when you work in a very one-dimensional world, automation and computation wins. But that is an aberration. And the markets will trick you into thinking that is what markets are. But that's the beauty of the markets. That's not the case. There have been entire industry growth, entire quant growth, multi-generational now, where, the next big thing you want to be now is a quant trader or being involved in quant. And you can see how, from the markets, there came the money, and then all of a sudden, all the advice and dogma flows like, oh, the best thing to do is to be a quant trader. The human trader is dead. Okay. That's been the narrative since 2015.
That's where he was, and that the human trader is this. You speak about it often in the book. The rise of him during the human trader is dead. And the other part, mentioning about, the narrative cognition, the distinction between machines' intelligence and our narrative cognition on our motor cortex, where, the birth of that activity is the part of machine that you can't also scale is how you galvanize and you utilize your emotions. And one thing that I wanted to, ask you is one of his greatest gifts, which is also, perhaps his, Achilles heel in his life outside of trading. But his greatest gift in trading is his pain and how he views pain. And one of the things he always talks about is the reason why he will deploy maximum size when he feels there's a big opportunity. And he's always, besides himself, if the market goes another 10x more than where he got out, or another 1.5 times more, and he then marks on the DOM, on the price ladder, how much he's actually lost in P&L. And he generates this pain for himself that the pain becomes so, he feels it in his chest, he feels it in his gut, that the next time he's faced with this, with an opportunity, he can't help himself but attack it because he wants to push past that pain.
Mm-hmm.
And so his lesson and his ability to use pain to improve is probably second to none. A lot of people who use pain just actually become more fearful the next time he trades.
If you're enjoying this discussion about the warrior, one of the traders in our book, Traders of Our Time, and you want to go deeper, head over to tradersofourtime.com to sign up and get chapter 1 for free. You'll stay in the loop with exclusive content, insights, and updates, and you'll be among the first to read the book when it launches on March 27, 2025.
How do you see how he interprets pain for improvement?
He does it in the most tragic sense, Alex, where it feels like the warrior just is a character who just walked out of a novel. He'd be the kind of person who is in such pain, in such tragedy surrounding him. He is quite literally a Prometheus chained to a rock who has the gift of immortality, yet suffers for it too, meaning his liver is being pecked out by a bird or a crow for eternity. And that is exactly what the warrior is. And I'm not being here dramatic for effect. That is quite literally. His greatest gift, you said it wonderfully, is also the source of his greatest anguish and so on. Emotions harnessed in this way is exactly also what separates the trader, the human discretionary trader, away from the machine, meaning that you can summon conviction, you can utilize a sample set of few, 1 or 0, put maximum size on it like as if you've seen it many, many times. And that's how you scale in size, and that's how you scale in performance, and that's how you can have very tiny down days and gigantic colossal up days most of the time. And that's just not scalable in a machine. And so that black box, the so-called black box of emotions, again, thinking of the dogma in the trading space, has been taken as something as an aberration. It's something that has to be purged from the human to become an ultimate trader, i.e. traders should not be emotional. But it's the very thing that gives the warrior his edge, his emotions.
And how often do we hear, you just said his emotions and edge. There is an overwhelming belief. And how many times I see when traders come into the space and after 6 months of experiencing themselves as the market unravels them, as the market starts peering into the deepest crevices of their spirit and their soul, that they don't like looking, they don't like reflecting on self, and they say, I want to become a systems trader. I want to do backtesting, and I want to remove my emotions. And the very fact of removing these most wonderful aspects of yourself, these archaic signaling systems, your emotions, fear, greed, shame, grief, which Angus Fletcher speaks about, those kind of 4 core emotions. Removing them, you're removing your potential, because each one of them is giving you a reflection of what you need to do next to improve and to grow on self. And so his ability to harness the emotions that most of us fear to look at consistently. And I think he is that person that does, again, break the rules of what emotions can do. And, mentioning that ability to scale your emotions, if used correctly, in a creative sense. Now, creativity, we've spoken about the word creativity multiple times. It can be trained. It's how you go. Most people spend time backtesting instead of world building, future prediction. And how do you do that? We have your training material on how we actually train our traders. So those emotions and those abilities to scale himself. Where else do you feel? Let's actually go back a little bit. What influence do you feel he's had amongst traders that are immediately around him? You said you're a fanboy in the early days.
Yes, still am.
His influence is a function of just sheer performance. What else do you feel his influence? Because I know there are young, hungry cats on the Axia trading floor who want to usurp him, who want to go for his title of being number 1 multiple years in a row. And he's not going to give up easy. You know his character, and you know his character well. You've had many conversations, many hours speaking to him whilst you're writing the book. Why? How do you feel others look at him?
I hope the traders will seemingly come close to usurping him, because this is how he will use his emotions. He will feel jealous, he'll feel angry, and that'll push him further, and he will beat them.
And you summarize that so well, because I've seen this happen multiple times.
Yes, that's why I said.
Yes. And we saw back in 2017, we had a trader who was closing, and you'd say, he would always create in his edge domains. He knows what spread he should have on his competition. And he uses competition in the sense that I wouldn't train my traders. Okay. And so therefore he defies many textbook training techniques. But that's why he's that sample set of 0. And he knows in certain edge domains, he's underperformed if he hasn't done 10x spread on the next biggest trader. And so once that spread closes, as the spread closes, his emotions expand and he starts drilling. And that competitiveness, you said also there, is perhaps jealousy,
fears, yeah, all that kettle
and
fish.
therefore those traders who try to usurp him many times collapse simply because he pushes them beyond comfort zones that they don't know if they breach it. Maybe they're trying to breach it too quickly.
Alex, coming back to how other traders see him, let's put it this way. The other day I walked into the Cyprus floor and I just saw the Warriors price ladders, but it was not the Warriors sitting there. It was a young grad, very, very young grad, like literally fresh off the boat, young grad. And he imitates him completely. And that's one influence, but it goes deeper. Again, we talk about the lineage on the floor and the influence. And I think I've seen this, people sitting next to him, hot desking in the hot seat right next to him. And they come back a bit more furious. They come back a bit more racket smashing. They come back, they have a bit more energy in them. But I think fundamentally, it's not because they see the warrior. Perhaps on some level, they see him do that. So like father, like son, they copy each other. But they see what it takes. And I think they believe that it can be done. And when you see that it can be done, and when you can believe it can be done, and that you can do it, you start to care. And when you start to care, it's when the racket smashing happens, because to the true performer, you will always underperform. Always.
And you'll always care.
Yeah, and you'll always care and you'll always be pissed off. And and again, I've seen that transition of one, we talked about him recently, Alex. There's now 2 tall blonde guys in the Cyprus office. So if I say blonde, we will, but the much younger one who sits behind the collector, we just talked about him. You said you've noticed a change in his presence, a change in his behavior where he's just upset. And I remember when I first saw him on the floor, he was, a very calm young graduate. But now when I see him and I meet him and you talked about him, he's now angry. He's always upset because he knows he can perform. He's done it and he knows he can push himself, and he's now started to push. And in that environment, he'll always be upset. And it's also just understanding that, again, the word says it's a dark and dirty habit of him, screaming and shouting. And when I say screaming and shouting, I'm probably I'm underplaying it. I mean, he truly, like, he goes from waves of screaming and shouting to whispering under his breath, where suddenly you think the furniture will start levitating because, I don't know, he's summoning something in Greek. And and when he goes silent, it's truly bad, as everyone will tell you. But so it's a whole range of things, but you just know that right there is a true performer who expects to perform every single time. And that's what you said, the power of emotions, utilizing that. It's that, to belabor a very used shop-worn metaphor, he is kind of like the Hulk. The more he gets upset and pressured and angry, the more he might, on the rare occasions, he might miss certain things. For him, importantly, Alex, a lot of viewers will know this, but it comes off in the book, he is infinitely more upset about missed opportunities as opposed to losses. Because losses, he still tackled it. It played out how it did. Okay, that's to be upset about, something to learn from. But missed opportunity, for him, he treats it as fundamental dereliction of his duty to be there. And like, why did he miss it? Why? He says, why did I miss it? I must be stupid. Why am I here? And all sorts of crazy self-talk starts happening.
But you're mentioning, but you just on that missed opportunity, I just wanted to, if you were to decode this video and all of his personality feedback responses, that missed opportunity, if we cared so much about missed opportunity, we would reverse engineer and we'd compound our skill set.
Mm-hmm.
If it didn't mean much on missed opportunity, how are you going to embody that experience of improving and developing and getting better going forward?
I think it's exactly what the word said in the book, that he treats every day like the markets will be shut tomorrow forever. And he truly trades like it. He trades it like he means it. And there's this point, Alex, where truly you don't know when your last trade will happen. And once you start drawing a living from your trading account, once this gets serious, once it becomes your sole source of income and you're pushing and there's so much riding on you performing and so on, like an athlete, I think very quickly, most people, 99% of the time, will quickly realize that a missed opportunity is far more of an egregious mistake than just taking a loss on it. And there's something we talked in our previous video with the collector, that there's fundamental trust. There's fundamental trust that you know how much of a loss you can take, that you can wear it, that you navigated it, that it's fine because your upside is multiple times your loss. And it's the opportunity cost of having missed it. Loss for the warrior might be, let's talk about it, Alex. Let's talk about his worst day in March. That, we'll talk towards like the end of that story. He was onside $1 million, very close to it, and he came all the way back. He was upset. But in that moment, at that place in his career, that was the right decision. Why? Because you need that kind of mentality where you can forego the smaller fish, even if the small fish is $1 million, because he is now in the place where he can push and pull out multiple millions. And so to be able to stomach that kind of washback, to push himself to do it, is again utilizing his kind of demonic sense of I can't miss this, and it's what pushes you over the edge to stay in the trade and see it through. And so much of the recent trades, Alex, now with Trump and a lot of these articles going on about tariffs and so on, it needs that kind of staying power where you have to sort of summon your ability to, not click for the immediate, you're on side immediately $100,000 if you're a young trader. You have to forego that kind of, oh my God, this is amazing, I'm going to click and take this out. You have to stay in it, because then what can follow is multiple six figures if you're a so-called young trader doing it. Yeah, and he can see through that.
Yeah, that day that you mentioned, giving back approximately $1 million, that then creates a new discomfort boundary that he reaches in order to, elevate those levels. Now, as a trader who has been pushing the boundary, I have thought personally that he would burn out multiple times. That type of expressiveness, that type of emotion, it's almost like people were saying about Rafael Nadal in his early days, the swashbuckling pirate, playing the game hard, tough, big moves on a clay court, splits, knees being bound up. They said he's going to be retired by the age of 22. He lived to have an incredibly long career as a trader. Myself, I sometimes think if I were to trade like the warrior, I would have burnt out multiple times every single day and never had a career again. But somehow he transcends these emotions, he leverages them, he uses them, he understands them. He understands what it means, because over and above all of this is an incredibly controlled performer. Do you want to elaborate a little bit on that?
I think everyone underestimates, and I think I was shocked. I was definitely shocked. I am still shocked, to be honest. Everyone underestimates how explosive he is, but how controlled he is. He is probably, he's explosively patient. And his downside, no matter how he, you see visually how emotional and upset he is, his downside is just very, very, very consistent, always. And again, this links very beautifully, Alex, what we just said. That was the right decision for him at the time in his career to give back that 1 million. And this is the nuance that we get into the book. And this is extremely important, what I'm about to say, for people to understand. We talk about in the Warriors chapter the difference between a cash flow trader and a wealth building trader. The warrior is very much now in the position in his career where he can be wealth building, which means foregoing smaller opportunities and going for the big opportunities, because they're so rare. And this is why you should be upset. Because when you work up the leagues, to directly answer your question, Alex, when you work up the leagues, to have those, the engineer said, there's only a handful of trades in a year that can truly take you into the stratosphere. And those are few and far in between. We're not taking we're not talking here about multi-million-dollar trades on like a 3-tick little scalp play that moves markets. This is historical. Nearly always is going to be historical moments in the market we're talking about. Okay. So for you to miss those, when you can take yourself into a next level stratosphere, is a dereliction of your job at the time, if you're a wealth building trader like the warrior. But should a junior young little trader find himself in the same trade as the warrior, and people did in the warrior in March 2020, find themselves ludicrously on side to P&L that they could never imagine instantly, for them to give all that back is exactly the wrong thing to do, because they got to pay rent in 2 weeks. And this is when the white space of strategy does not meet the reality of being a practicing trader. Everyone will tell you, that you screwed up the EV of your trade, this and that, statistics, measurements, principles of, no, you have to be this kind of, yeah, but man, you got to pay rent in 2 weeks. And I didn't appreciate this at the time, and that as well also is what resurrected many careers of struggling traders, just being that, as you say, primed to participate, and you have these outsized returns just because you're there and you click. So if you're a cash flow trader where you need the damn money, you gotta click out. But the warrior is not there. However, he started as a cash flow trader. So in the book, we discussed how does one transition from cash flow to wealth building, understanding that kind of nuance. And lastly, to answer your question, Alex, something we can tie in, it ties in throughout the whole book because it's a very important principle. And we mentioned before, with the warrior, we can understand what the burdens of a strategy is. And different strategy have different burdens. Trading news flow or trading flow, which just happens to be news a lot of the time, that's probably the best way to describe the warrior, have these burdens. And some people can bear it better than others. And as being extremely aware of that there will be a burden, there's no escaping it, there's no easy way. But understanding that you actually might have an edge over other people taking on some kind of burdens that other people cannot. Like we said before, the raiser can't stand being in the markets. That's his biggest burden. And the warrior can't stand not being in the markets, okay? And as you said, for you, perhaps that might cause burnout, but for a trader who might be saying the same thing as you or thinking the same, that does not mean your career is over by any means. It's just understanding how you can develop laterally, adjacently from there, and layer up different understandings of the markets, participate differently, and so on and so forth. So I hope that also gives viewers an overview of understanding the different kind of, the burdens of a strategy we introduced in chapter 1, the razor. We lay the foundations there, but we work upon that principle from different angles as the book progresses. So we've gone from chapter 1 and so on, and now we're at chapter 5, the warrior. And as we layer on different, so you can see different angles of attack on the same kind of principle. And I think that gave the opportunity there, Alex, to discuss those two things. And the warrior itself, those two chapters, the warrior part 1 and part 2, are absolutely loaded. It still shocks us, when we read it after so long, how it's just loaded with these kind of things, both extremely explicit and implicit as well.
And these, as we draw to conclusion, the two parts in the warrior, the learning. What are the cheap? Who is the warrior for?
The warrior is for shattering your damn expectations. If you're a new trader, you'll have many, unfortunately, expectations about what trading is not, what's possible in this game, what is not possible. And he'll shatter you on both how one should behave, on both one can achieve in this space. That is also, I say that also for people who've come from other careers, trading different strategies, different things. And perhaps, let's say, they're much more quantitative and much more statistical based, and for them to realize that there's a whole other legion of traders that have so-called been apparently thrown into the history's dustbin because they're human and discretionary. In fact, they have thrived, wonderfully. 2 is for those who understand that, perhaps let's say this a bit more darkly, Alex, the cost of performance. For you to understand what you're getting involved in. The book does not shy away from the darker side of trading, and it's an extremely important part. It is for you to understand what absolute performance takes out of you. The market's definitely taken their pound of flesh many times from the warrior, and the kind of toll it takes on a trader. And as we discussed in other traders chapter, do you want the end game? Do you want the warrior's end game? Do you want to compete on his level? Some people will want it, and some people will work there. It doesn't mean every trader has to be there, but that's just the reality of someone who's pushing absolute boundaries in performance of what can be done, and in that kind of belief. And lastly, Alex, I'll add, for those who may not be convinced yet to the absolute need of looking at the markets through the price ladder, through flow, I think one strand out is very obvious in the warrior, and as obvious as in the hero and the engineers chapter. Those 3 traders, in one side, the hero and the engineer, and on one side, the warrior, are diametrically opposed. One are, shall we say, systems 2, slow thinkers, puzzle piece solving, market profile users. And one is your hyper-reactionary, Federer, pirate, bulldog kind of trader. Both use the price ladder, and both grew up as supreme order flow navigators. And that is the core of every human discretionary trader, of understanding and looking through the price ladder. It is basically the foundational stone that every house of trading has to be built on. It's impossible otherwise. And so I think people, even though, let's say, other traders may not look to trade the same way as the warrior, or conversely, the hero or the engineer, to understand how the foundational thing for all these traders is the price ladder. You cannot shy away from it. That's how about you, Alex? What do you think from?
My favorite part, and we spoke about it before the book, is the ability to understand the difference between a sample set of one
Yes.
and many, and we explore that
Yes.
and that narrative cognition. So those who want to be a news trader, what are the skill sets?
Mhm.
What are the areas of your brain that you have to train to be able to world build, to be able to operate like the warrior? And we explore the differences between the visual cortex, the motor cortex, in the sense of narrative cognition versus machine cognition. And once you can start understanding that distinction, you might know as a trader after reading this chapter, well, if I want to improve, I need to do a little bit less backtesting and a little bit more in understanding how to enhance my creativity through techniques such as hybridized thinking, perspective shifting, world building, in order to create my future.
Mm-hmm.
Not to live in the past, but to create that future for yourself. And that's what humans have done for centuries and centuries, is that we create new futures, we create new existence. And it's no different in the trading domain. For all of those who understand who the warrior is, these two chapters are literally a book on their own.
Yes, that is absolutely no exaggeration. That is quite literally, it's like the book of Job within the Bible.
And what's incredible is, for the first time, those who've been messaging us for years,
Mm-hmm.
would you ever do an interview? He's shown his trades on YouTube, and now you can read these chapters and get into the mind of the warrior, and perhaps one of the best discretionary futures day trader, at least in the European continent, that I know of. My circles go back for 20 years now, as well as his influence to people across the pond who have grown. I know a trader who's learned from him, has become an 8-figure trader. And it's that book for those to unravel a legend of our industry. Thank you, Bogdan.
Thank you, Alex.